What's up everyone, Alex here. So Atlus had a huge gameplay reveal for Metaphor ReFantazio very recently, and I've been up since 5:30 in the morning dissecting, rewatching, writing notes to give you this massive deep dive on how Metaphor ReFantazio plays, as well as some things that they have actually conveniently omitted for the future. Now, before we begin, I just want to let you know that the way that this video is going to work is that we're not going to be talking about the story at all, because I'm not a fan of story breakdowns whatsoever. I'm just really interested in the gameplay here. So that's exactly what you're going to get. For the first part, we're actually going to take the time to examine the name of the game and how that actually tells us how the game is going to be played. There's actually a lot in that little title. Second of all, of course, there's going to be the gameplay breakdown, which will include all of the hints that Atlus has dropped in this video. They've tried their hardest to really tuck in some little secrets here and there that they want to talk about in the future, but I've got an eagle eye and I've noticed several of them that we're going to be talking about in this video. Naturally, we're also going to be talking about the gameplay loop, how the dungeoning is actually going to work, and how going to towns and going to dungeons is going to work out, and battling as well. And of course, more importantly, we're going to be talking about the brand new hybrid action/turn-based system in the game and really diving deep into that and figuring out how that actually works. And if at any time while watching this video you find it informative and entertaining, please take the time to like, post a comment talking about the different aspects of the game that you like, and of course, subscribe to the channel. We couldn't be here where we are today without your support, so thank you very much. So the name of the game, Metaphor ReFantazio, actually has a lot of meaning outside of its title. In fact, the definition of metaphor is it's a figure of speech in which a word or phrase literally denoting one kind of idea or object is used in place of another to suggest a likeness or analogy between them. And of course, the idea of ReFantazio, ReFantasy, which is Project ReFantasy, used to be the codename of this game, is to reimagine what a fantasy game should be in this modern age. And the way that they talked about it in the video is that they kind of envisioned a world that would imagine our world as their fantasy, which is actually a really neat kind of thing to think about. But ultimately, what Metaphor ReFantazio actually means is that they're using persona mechanics as a metaphor to tell a brand new story in a completely reimagined fantasy world that is unlike any other out there. The video showcase actually starts off while you're in town, and they made sure to note that there will be multiple towns in Metaphor ReFantazio with each of their own main story beats. They also made mention that this game will run on a calendar system similar to the Persona series. This basically meant that you will be moving from town to town depending on your place on the calendar, with different story beats and dungeons to defeat for every single town. What this also means that main story missions will have a deadline, and there doesn't seem to be any deadlines for side stories, but any sort of mission that you take on will be ranked in difficulty between 1 to 10, because apparently you can tackle all of these in any order that you so wish. Now, the video also vaguely says that the side quests are important to the main story, but what they really meant is that these side stories will reward you by giving you rare equipment and fighting rare monsters with tons of XP. In other words, they're your typical side quests which will help you prepare for the main story mission itself. Weapons you buy at the shops will alter the type of basic attack you'll inflict. Slash, strike, and pierce were shown. Additionally, they also showed taverns, which are great places to find hints and tips for your dungeon runs. These taverns also have inns in the back that help replenish your health and magic. They also talked about the follower system, which is this game's version of social links. This is basically a place that you can unlock new archetypes. We'll talk about archetypes in a little bit. Now, the catch-22 is that quest locations themselves typically take you away from the towns, so traveling is going to be an important part of your experience with Metaphor. Unlike other games, traveling isn't instantaneous, as time is heavily considered thanks to the calendar system. The developer said that this is all to simulate the feeling of traveling with your companions, which, if you think about it, is one of the biggest qualities of RPGs like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. This also means that main story missions can be found, for example, on the opposite side of a region. So you want to make sure that you have enough time to travel from where you are to the main story in order to complete said mission. While you're traveling, you'll be riding a vehicle called the Gauntlet Runner, which also lets you do a variety of things on it. As I said, traveling from one point to another isn't instantaneous, and this travel time instead functions like a day in Persona where you're not going into a dungeon, which lets you build up your stats and potentially build up your relationship with your followers. And yes, the video glosses over it, but you do have different stats that you have to build up, much like Persona, like Courage, for example. There are a bunch of activities that you can do on the Gauntlet Runner that can potentially raise your stats, including cleaning the vehicle, cooking, and more that they've yet to show. One of the biggest reveals of this video is the archetype system. The video initially calls them jobs to give you a shorthand of what they actually are, but they're really called archetypes in this game. But the bottom line is that they are this game's representation of personas. In fact, the video even mentions that there will be a ton of archetypes in the game. Unlike Persona, however, there seems to be a fixed upgrade path for each archetype. This screen shows, for example, that a knight can turn into a magic knight, then a paladin, then ultimately perhaps a dark knight, though the upgrade path seems like it can be fluid. Now, this is just conjecture, but based on the way this grid is created, it would be cool if you can somehow work your way around this board so you can create hybrids of archetypes, similar to how you could, in theory, work your way around the sphere grid in Final Fantasy X, but instead of different stats and skills, you basically unlock different hybrids of jobs. So, for example, a Dark Knight that has some of the thief's skills would be pretty cool, actually. Conveniently, the game also features an auto-equip function whenever you change archetypes, and also displays how your attack and defense changes. Each archetype's stats are divided into 5 categories: strength, magic, endurance, agility, and luck. Also, each archetype has its own rank and set of skills. Rank is basically the terminology they use to describe each archetype's levels. And for additional clarification, each archetype's rank is locked to that particular person. So for example, if the main character has a rank 11 warrior, that doesn't mean it's going to be rank 11 for another character. Skill types function similarly to Persona. You have your different melee types in Slash, Strike, and Pierce, and different magic elements in Fire, Ice, Lightning, Wind, Light, and Dark. Not surprisingly, some skills are named the same from Persona, like Mudo and Tarukaja, but there are new names too, like Dei replaces Dia for weak HP healing, Cyclo replaces Garo for weak wind attacks, Bot replaces Agi for weak fire attacks, Kande replaces Zayo for weak lightning attacks, Blizz replaces Bufu for weak ice attacks, and Tetra Break, which is probably this game's version of Tetrakarn. Now, here's the biggest deal about the system. Unlike in Persona games where only the protagonist can equip multiple personas, every single party member in Metaphor can equip a new archetype. The video also implies that you can, theoretically, have an all-melee party. Something noteworthy that I noticed in the battle screen is that you cannot change archetypes during combat, which is a pretty big difference from Persona. When you're exploring dungeons, your fairy can scan enemies, a la Persona 5. This helps gauge enemy difficulty, with blue designating weak, yellow being an even combat difficulty, and red, which was not revealed, but I'm guessing this will be a thing because this is the universal color to represent danger. There are of course dungeons that are part of the main story, as well as side dungeons that are part of side quests. Metaphor ReFantazio will feature more dungeons than Persona, and the dungeons were actually designed with player pacing in mind, so that we don't overstay our welcome and its challenges still able to engage us in different ways. What I'm guessing this means is that different mechanics like traps will exist in these dungeons, as well as puzzles that won't completely stall your progress. Like, how many RPGs have we played where they feature puzzles that just completely stall our progress in the dungeon? If you engage with an enemy that doesn't see you, your party gets a free turn during turn-based combat. But I did make mention that combat in Metaphor is a hybrid of both action and turn-based combat. In fact, the developers actually talked about how the combat in Metaphor is supposed to be fast-paced, and this is how they basically go about doing so. Simply put, You use action gameplay to kill weaker enemies in blue because you're fighting them by yourself, and you'll still get the same requisite XP and drops. But when you're fighting a yellow or higher enemy, your attacks will still do damage, but you'll still need to inflict significantly more damage. This is when you call your squad to aid you, and when the game transitions to turn-based combat. Turn-based will most likely be reserved for stronger enemies, like bosses. Now, a lot of people have talked about Trails Through Daybreak in relation to Metaphor, but this is different compared to that game, because in Trails Through Daybreak, you can still transition out of turn-based combat back to action. But in Metaphor, once you call your squad, you're committed to that combat style. Metaphor's action combat is your typical melee attack, dodge roll, and dash/run function. Turn-based gameplay, on the other hand, is a little bit more complex. These are the type of commands that I saw showcased during the trailer. Analyze, of course, is still part of battle, a staple of the Persona series. There's a pass function which yields your turn, and I'm not sure if this functions like the baton pass system in Persona games. That's not quite clear yet. Guard for defense. Synthesis, which only has the descriptor team-up attacks. Melee for your regular attacks. Archetype, which basically calls your archetype so you can use their skills. Items to use your supplies. Retry, which we didn't see actually shown in the trailer, but I'm guessing one of two things. One, it lets you retry the entire battle, or just undo the last turn that you just did. Of course, it also has auto battle, which lets all of your characters engage in the combat themselves without your control. Escape, which is hidden behind the tactics button. And a couple of unexplained features like formation, assist, and I mentioned tactics. And now that I think about it, this is most likely where you're going to be able to set if your party members can act independently of you, like in Persona. There's also this horse-drawn carnage super attack, and I'm not sure where this is coming from, but what I did notice that it was actually activated during the main character's turn, which has another party member attacking the enemy with a super powerful attack. Could this be the assist function? I'm pretty sure we'll find out in the future. Enemies will also have a life bar that visibly shows how much HP they have left. That's super convenient. I should also point out that towards the end of the section after defeating the Manju, as the video faded into black, the player just decided to take on the Manju with action combat, most likely due to the fact that this is an evenly matched opponent. You can even see the player use the dodge roll to avoid the Manju's attacks and inflict a decent amount of damage to it, but not as much compared to the turn-based mode. So to sum up what we've seen today, there's definitely a lot of elements from Persona carried over to Metaphor ReFantazio, but certainly moved around so that way it makes a lot of sense within the context of this game world. Now, I'm really also liking the hybrid combat system, and I actually predicted that this was how it's going to function before based off of the trailers, but what I didn't expect, of course, is how they are going to make it different from something like Trails Through Daybreak, which it seems like the move towards turn-based combat every single time has to be purposeful, because you are going to get locked down in that sort of experience as opposed to flip-flopping between like the action combat and turn-based combat willy-nilly. And I think there's something to be said about a deliberate approach when compared to Trails. But of course, we'll be the judge of things when the game actually comes out on October 11th. And that's Metaphor ReFantazio in a nutshell for you. Now, before you go, I just want to encourage you to like the video if you found this information helpful and entertaining, and post a comment letting me know which aspects of Metaphor ReFantazio's gameplay are truly exciting you. And of course, subscribe to the channel for any future updates on any turn-based JRPGs, or any JRPGs for that matter, that's coming up within the next few months and the next few years. We wouldn't be here without your help. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I'm looking forward to reading your comments down below. And I'll see you in the next video.